Okay, so then that's your please.
Yeah, we can start, and people will come in as they're available. But we do, as you noticed, this is a hybrid event, so we already have a bunch of people waiting online. So maybe I think we should start. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anna Su. I'm a member of the faculty here in the law school, but I'm also here in my capacity as a research lead at the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society here at the University of Toronto. I guess I would say between 5-10 years ago, a crossover event, like on a topic like this is probably not really something I would have imagined. But it's 2025, and so here we are. I just wanted to say a few words because I thought having these kinds of fields, people who are interested either in animal law or people who are interested in AI or personhood in general, I think should pay attention to animal law and vice versa, because I think both fields raise critical questions about ethics, personhood, and the boundaries of legal rights. And as AI systems become more autonomous and lifelike, debates about their treatment, responsibilities, and protections increasingly mirror those of animal law. And so studying how society addresses the rights and welfare of non-human animals offers valuable insights into how we might navigate the legal and moral challenges posed by intelligent machines, especially in areas like agency, sentience, and vulnerability. And conversely, understanding animal law can help AI thinkers anticipate and shape the evolving relationship between law, technology, and non-human entities. And so we're very delighted today to welcome our speaker, Jeff Sebo. My colleague and also like the sponsor, one of the sponsors of this event, Angela Fernandez, will also give a few words.
Thanks, Anna, so much. And it's great to see people in the room, also lots of people online. Thank you for coming. This is, as Anna mentioned, the first co-sponsored event that the Animal Law Program is doing. It launched in September, and so we're really excited and more of these things in the future. So that's really exciting. I'll just tell you a little bit about our speaker, Jeff, is Associate Professor of Environmental Studies, Affiliate Professor of Bioethics, Medical Ethics, Philosophy and Law, Director of the Center for Environmental and Animal Protection.
No, I just threw it out there.
For my ethics and policy. I don't know if everybody needs to mute themselves on Zoom. That would be great. And co-director of the Wild Animal Welfare Program at NYU, New York University. So NYU's been doing so much stuff in the field of animal law and environmental law for a number of years, and so they're very lucky to have Jeff there, and we're very lucky to have him here with us today. He's going to be speaking about his new book, The Moral Circle, which I'll pass around for people who would like to take a look and see. And then I also brought Jeff's previous book of Oxford University Press, Saving Animals, Saving Ourselves, Why Animals Matter for Pandemic, Climate Change, and Other Catastrophes. And it's a really, really wonderful book, this book. I would highly recommend it.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Anna and Angela, for doing the work you do here and also inviting me to come talk to your groups. I love being an excuse for bringing the animal and the AI parts of the law faculty together. And hopefully there can be more of that. I agree with you and appreciate your opening remarks about how there are important and in some cases surprising connections between animal minds and ethics and policy and AI minds and ethics and policy. And I think both fields can benefit from, yes, some separation, but also some integration. And so maybe this conversation can be a space for you to bring them together and see what kinds of connections we might find. And that is indeed one of the themes of my book, The Moral Circle, which people are passing around right now. And that will be the focus of the talk today, though we can then take the discussion wherever folks like in the Q&A. So the main topic of my book and the main topic of this talk is the moral circle. So it might help for me to start by saying what I mean by the moral circle, what philosophers mean by the moral circle. By the moral circle, we mean our conception of the scope of the moral community. Who merits consideration, respect, compassion in decisions that affect them? Which individuals, which beings, which entities merit consideration, respect, and compassion. So obviously, for much of human history, especially in the West and to some extent everywhere, we have had quite conveniently narrow conceptions of the moral circle, extending consideration primarily to select humans, maybe the occasional charismatic companion animal. Though recently we have appreciated the need to very significantly expand the moral circle to include at the very least all humans and many non-human animals affected by human activity, including mammals and birds, who are quite clearly at this point conscious, sentient, agentic, morally significant. However, we are of course still making very frustratingly slow progress in actually achieving even minimum protections for fellow humans, to say nothing of non-human animals like mammals and birds. And the question that I pose in the book and want to pose in the talk today is, as we continue to do that much needed work to extend even minimum protections to fellow humans and mammals and birds, should we ask whether we should go farther still, whether we should extend at least some consideration to an even larger number and wider range of entities? And if so, who and why and what follows for our practices, our policies, our presumption of human exceptionalism, this idea that we always matter most, always take priority. And what I will be suggesting here today is that we in fact should expand the moral circle much farther and much faster, even than many philosophers have appreciated, and that there are significant implications for our practices and policies, priorities, our presumption of human exceptionalism. In particular, I will suggest that we should extend at least some moral consideration to, at minimum, all vertebrates, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, fishes, many invertebrates, including cephalopod mollusks like octopuses, decapod crustaceans like lobsters, even insects like ants and bees, and some near future AI systems, robots, chatbots, near future successors of the current models with which we can interact right now. And that will imply that we ought to reject human exceptionalism. We ought to reject this presumption that we always matter the most, that we always take priority. If we share a world with such a large number and such a wide range of beings that merit consideration, then we are not always individually or collectively going to come first. Okay. So first of all, why do I think that we should extend at least some consideration to all vertebrates, many invertebrates, and even some near future AI systems? Well, the reason is not that they definitely morally matter, or even that they probably morally matter. The reason is simply that there is a realistic, non-negligible, non-trivial chance that they morally matter based on the best information and arguments available to us today. So in other words, I am lowering the bar, lowering the threshold for minimum moral considerability. The threshold is not definite moral significance or even probable moral significance, but rather potential moral significance, a realistic potential of moral significance. And the reason I suggest that we set the threshold for considerability there is that this is a classic case of high stakes decision making involving disagreement and uncertainty, and that calls for caution and humility and the tools that we standardly use for navigating risk. Now, why do I characterize this question in those terms? Well, first of all, this question is important, high stakes, and difficult, uncertain. Important because it can be both easy and harmful to make mistakes about whether particular individuals morally matter and deserve consideration and respect and compassion. It can, of course, be easy to over-attribute consciousness, sentience, agency, moral significance to non-humans. This can especially be easy when they look like us and act like us, and when we use them as companions. This is already happening with current generation chatbots, for example. And that can be harmful when it occurs because it can lead us to form inappropriate social and emotional bonds with these entities, to allocate resources towards them instead of towards humans and other animals who really need them, even to make sacrifices for them, potentially even harming ourselves and others for them or because of them, that is all bad to be avoided. But of course, it can also be easy to under-attribute consciousness, sentience, agency, moral significance to non-humans. This is especially easy when they look different from us, when they act different from us, and when we use them as commodities. This is especially the case, for instance, with farmed animals, and especially farmed aquatic animals or farmed aquatic invertebrates. And that can obviously be harmful too, because it can lead to systematic exploitation and extermination of vulnerable populations against their will, often for trivial purposes. So we can debate which risk, which harm is worse in particular situations, but for now, the present point is simply that there is risk and potential harm in both directions. And that means that the stakes are high, and there is no easy, obvious, straightforward, universal way to err on the side of caution if we are in a situation involving disagreement or uncertainty about these issues. We might have no option except to engage with the evidence and the arguments and navigate risk in both directions. But then that brings us to the second part of this equation. This is also a very difficult set of questions. It involves a lot of disagreement and uncertainty, both about facts and about values. It touches on some of the most foundational and most contested issues in both science and philosophy. On the side of values, we still have disagreement and uncertainty about what it takes to morally matter, what it takes to deserve consideration and respect and compassion. For example, do you need to be sentient, capable of consciously experiencing pleasure, pain, happiness, suffering? Or is it enough to be conscious without being sentient, to be able to have feelings even if they lack a positive or negative valence? Or is it enough to be agentic without being conscious, to be able to set and pursue your own goals in a self-directed manner, even if it feels like nothing to be you? Experts continue to disagree about those questions, and there are other options too. And then on the science side, the fact side, we continue to have disagreement and uncertainty about what it takes to possess these capabilities. For example, to be conscious, to be capable of having feelings, subjective experiences. Do you need to have a brain with the exact structures and functions and materials as human or mammalian or avian brains? Or is it enough to have any cognitive system with broadly analogous capacities for perception, attention, learning, memory, self-awareness, social awareness, communication, flexible decision-making, perhaps a global workspace that integrates it all together, coordinates activity across these capabilities? Or is it enough to have an even simpler cognitive system that can engage in basic information processing or basic representation of objects in the environment? Experts still have disagreement and uncertainty about that question as well. And this disagreement and uncertainty is likely to be ongoing. We are not on the cusp of a secure theory of moral status or a secure theory of consciousness about which we can have anything approaching consensus or certainty for the foreseeable future. And that means that for the foreseeable future, as we continue to affect non-humans all over the planet, we are going to have to navigate these risks involving over-attribution of moral significance and under-attribution of moral significance under persistent conditions of deep disagreement and uncertainty about what it takes to matter and about who has what it takes. And that is a fraught situation, and it calls for caution and humility and the tools of decision-making under risk and uncertainty. And that is why I think we should extend at least some consideration, even if only very little, to an entity, if there is at least a realistic chance that that entity morally matters, given the best information and arguments available to us. And this is how we standardly make decisions across contexts. In our own personal lives, when contemplating taking a new medication, if there is even a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 chance of a fatal side effect, you give that at least a little bit of weight. You treat it as one factor among many. in decisions about whether to take the medicine. In public health or environmental policy, regarding pandemics or climate change, if there is even a 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 chance of catastrophe, that too should receive at least a little bit of weight, be treated as at least one factor among many in our policy decisions about how to navigate these complex global issues. And that is what I am suggesting we do when making decisions about the scope of the moral circle under uncertainty as well. If there is even a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, say, chance that a particular entity merits consideration, then we should give that entity at least a little bit of weight. We should treat our effects on that entity as at least one factor among many in decisions about what to do in the spirit of caution and humility. That is the framework that I am suggesting we use for the foreseeable future. Now, how can we go about assessing the probability that a particular entity merits consideration? Well, that requires thinking about both the values and the facts, thinking about how likely is it that sentience is required for moral status versus consciousness being enough versus agency being enough. And then how likely is it that my exact kind of brain is required for being conscious versus simpler brain being enough, or even silicon-based brain being enough. Now, these, of course, are very difficult probabilities to estimate, and it requires different approaches on the value side and the fact side. But to give you a flavor of how we can go about doing this in a rigorous, systematic, principled way, we can think a little bit about how people are now using what is called a marker method to estimate the probability of consciousness, despite ongoing uncertainty about the basic nature of consciousness. And the way that the marker method works is we can start by looking inward. We can start by asking, when do I have conscious feelings? When does it feel like something to be me? And what parts of my brain and body and behavior are associated with those conscious experiences? And then we can go look for broadly analogous behavioral and anatomical and other features in other types of entities. And when we find those features in other types of entities, that is, of course, not proof that they are conscious. Proof is not available in the absence of a secure theory of consciousness. But it can at least count as evidence, and it can at least tick up the probability ever so slightly. So, for example, with non-human animals, in addition to asking, do they have brains with the same types of structure as human or mammalian or avian brains, we can also ask basic behavioral questions like, do they nurse their own wounds? Do they respond to analgesics and antidepressants in the same ways that we do? Do they make thoughtful behavioral trade-offs between the avoidance of noxious stimuli and the pursuit of other valuable goals like food or water or a nice new shell, in a way that would be suggestive of the ability to integrate information? In the case of AI, we are not quite able to look for those exact types of behavioral evidence because, of course, AI systems are made out of very different materials than us. They have a very different origin story than we do, and that limits our ability to treat similar behaviors as caused by similar underlying systems and structures. We also know for a fact that many AI systems were specifically designed to mimic human behavior. And that means if your chatbot tells you, I am conscious or I am not conscious, you should not treat that language output as particularly good evidence one way or the other. That is probably best explained by text prediction and pattern matching and not introspective awareness of the actual capabilities of the system. But we might be able to work towards the development of systems whose language outputs would count as stronger evidence. And in the meantime, we can look underneath potentially misleading behaviors for the underlying architectural analogs of anatomical features that would count as evidence of consciousness in humans and other animals. So we can look to see whether they, in a silicon-based form, have their own version of perception, attention, learning, memory, self-awareness, social awareness, language, flexible decision-making, a global workspace. And again, not proof, but to the extent that those capabilities exist in silico and are integrated in broadly functionally similar ways, that does count as evidence according to a wide range of leading scientific theories of consciousness, and it ticks up the probability of consciousness given ongoing uncertainty about which theory of consciousness is correct. So when we look for this evidence, what do we find? Well, on the animal side, when we look for this evidence, we do tend to find at least some of it. It took us way too long to start looking for the evidence, but now that we are looking for it, we are finding at least some suggestive features in a very wide range of taxa. And about a year ago, we marked the state of progress in the field by bringing leading scientists to New York University to launch what is now called the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness. And this has been signed by hundreds of experts all over the world. And what this declaration holds is that the scientific evidence is now strong and diverse enough to support attributions of consciousness to mammals and birds, yes, but then also at least a realistic possibility of consciousness in all vertebrates, including reptiles, amphibians, and fishes, and many invertebrates, including cephalopod mollusks, decapod crustaceans, and even insects, of whom I should emphasize there are more than a quintillion alive at any given time in expectation. So this is truly a large number and wide range of individuals about whom there is now enough evidence to support at least a realistic possibility of consciousness. Now, in the case of AI, there is not yet similarly strong evidence. Even when we go and look at current language models with an open mind, we are not finding as much behavioral even, but also certainly architectural evidence of consciousness as we find in, for example, vertebrates and invertebrates. But we are finding the initial seeds of this kind of evidence, minimal initial, not yet fully integrated forms of perception or attention or learning or memory, even the beginnings of a kind of global workspace that can bring some of them together to create multimodal modules. And we also know that AI companies and governments have big budgets and a strong incentive to work towards the creation of entities that would be more likely to be sentient, conscious, agentic, because even though sentience, consciousness, agency are not the same as general intelligence, they do share many of the same underlying features and functions. And so we might find that in the course of trying to be the first to achieve artificial general intelligence, AI companies or governments, without realizing it, accidentally turn on a spark of sentience or consciousness or agency, in much the same way that evolution did with us and other animals. Evolution was not trying to make us have feelings like pleasure and pain and happiness and suffering and satisfaction and frustration, but it happened to come along for the ride. It happened to emerge along the way because they turned out to be either useful for features that enhanced our fitness or side effects of features that enhanced our fitness. We might find that the same happens in the course of AI development. So for me, that all adds up to not necessarily a certainty of sentience, consciousness, agency, moral significance, not even a probability, except for mammals and birds and certain other animals who are quite close to us on the tree of life, but at least a realistic possibility, at least a 1 in 100 chance that right now, more than 1 million species of animal, more than a quintillion individual animals can experience at least flickers of their own form of pleasure and pain. And then in the next 5 or 10 years, say, the same could be true for at least some highly advanced digital minds, for all we know right now. It's not to say that this will definitely happen, not even to say that this will probably happen, but right now we are not able to rule out at least a 1 in 100 chance that this will happen. And if there is even a 1 in 100 chance that this will happen within the next 5 or 10 years, we should take at least basic steps now to acknowledge that this is a possibility, start assessing the models, and start preparing policies and procedures so that we can make thoughtful decisions when the time comes. Now, suppose that this argument is correct. Suppose that what I have said so far is persuasive, and that first of all, we should extend at least some moral consideration to an entity if that entity has at least, say, a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 chance of mattering morally, as far as we can currently tell. And then suppose that a truly vast number and wide range of non-human entities, including all vertebrates, many invertebrates, and some near future AI systems meet that standard. And so we should extend at least minimal moral consideration to millions of species of non-humans and quintillions of individual non-humans. And we can expect that both the variety and the sheer number will increase over time as these new technologies come online. What do we make of that? What follows for what we should actually do in our individual lives and in our collective practices and policies, and especially our priorities as a species? And that is what I would like to close this talk by reflecting on a little bit. And I think a worry that one might have here is that if this argument is correct, then the implications are overwhelming and transformative and ultimately disruptive and destabilizing. How would we eat? How would we move around? How would we go about engaging in further sustainable development for our species and improving human lives and societies and making sure we can take care of ourselves? And we might then worry that there would be no way of ethically going about these activities if so many non-humans mattered, or at least might matter. And we might then feel a strong temptation just to dismiss or reject the idea that so many humans matter or might matter, or at least that we have responsibilities to them. So what I would like to suggest, first of all, is that is not the right conclusion to draw. We might live in a world where a very large number and wide range of beings merit consideration, and where hard choices need to be made all the time. And if that is the world we live in, then we got to acknowledge that reality and then use the best tools available to us to figure out how to navigate those tensions and trade-offs and make good decisions. But then I also want to suggest that we can and should non-arbitrarily strike a balance between, on the one hand, prioritizing non-humans much more, but then on the other hand, still prioritizing ourselves to an extent and ensuring that we can have good lives and societies and make progress as a species. And so let me explain why and how I think we can and should strike that balance, and close with a couple of concrete, practical implications for different types of policies. So first of all, one might think, okay, even if a lot of non-humans matter, we still matter more because we still have more sophisticated capabilities. We still have more complex brains and longer lifespans, and that means there is more at stake for an individual human than for an individual worm, say. If a house is burning down and you can only save me or a worm, but not both, you can be warranted in picking me without being speciesist. Because I have a more complex brain, I have a longer lifespan, that means plausibly I can experience more happiness and suffering at any given time, and then I have more years of happiness or suffering ahead of me, and that means there is more at stake over here than over here. And so you can break the tie in favor of saving me, preventing more suffering at present, allowing for more happiness in the future, without being accused of discriminating on the basis of species membership alone. That makes sense. That makes sense. However, that is not enough to justify a universal policy of prioritizing individual and collective humans. Because first of all, we might not always have more complex brains and longer lifespans. African elephants, for example, have 3 times the number of neurons as humans do. Immortal jellyfishes, if they have any consciousness at all, well, they can be immortal. They can live for a very long time. And in the future, there could be AI systems with both much more complex cognitive systems and much longer lifespans than individual humans. So there could be some exceptions, some cases where if you are making decisions based on brain complexity and lifespan, it might not always break in our favor. But moreover, even if the average human carries much more weight than the average non-human for these kinds of reasons from an impartial perspective, there are still way more non-humans in the world than humans. There are about 8 billion humans alive at any given time right now. There are, again, more than a quintillion individual insects alive at any given time, to say nothing of all of the other non-humans. And so even if we matter 1 million times more than the average non-human, In the aggregate, non-humans still matter more than us from an impartial perspective. You would really have to put your thumb on the scales and gerrymander your allocation of moral weight across species to avoid that conclusion. Okay, you might say, fine, fine, fine. Every now and then, an individual non-human might matter more than an individual human from an impartial perspective. And yes, collectively in the aggregate, they matter more than we do from an impartial perspective. But morality is not simply about impartiality. There is also room for partiality and relationality and practical considerations in morality. For example, I have a right to prioritize my family over your family, and indeed all of the other families of the world combined, in the sense that I should make sure my partner gets some food, that my family gets some food, that they get water, that they have shelter, that they have affection, before I start trying to feed everybody else and give water and shelter to everybody else. And not because my family intrinsically from an impartial perspective matters more than every other family combined. The reason is, this is my family. I have a special relationship with them, and I owe them duties of care in light of that special relationship. I also happen to live with them, and I know them really well, and that means that I know what they want and need in an especially intimate way, and I have an ability to provide it for them effortlessly, cost-effectively. Also, we, practically speaking, need to take care of ourselves and each other in order to be able to individually and collectively sustain any level of support for all of the other families in the world. And all the same can be true at the species level, at least to an extent. We have certain special social and other relational bonds with fellow humans that might not fully extend to all of the other species of the world. We also know more about what fellow humans want and need, have a better ability, more institutions, more infrastructure for providing fellow humans with what they need. And we, as a species, need to take care of ourselves and continue to invest in our own education and development in order to be able to achieve or sustain any measure of support for all of the non-humans of the world. I think those are reasonable arguments, to be honest. But again, they only take us so far. They do not vindicate anything close to the status quo for human exceptionalism. And I can briefly explain why, then close with a couple of implications. First of all, we have special relationships with many non-human animals too. Unfortunately, and my partner is aware of this, no humans matter more to me than my dog Smokey. My dog Smokey matters more than every human, including my partner. I do dedicate the book to Smokey, yes, yes. And personal relationships, bonds of care, are not the only morally significant kind of relationship. We now live in the Anthropocene, a geological epoch defined by the impacts of human activity on the rest of the planet. That means we are now interacting with non-humans everywhere, whether we like it or not. And when you interact with someone, when you exercise power and influence over someone, then that generates a different kind of relational responsibility to exercise that power and influence responsibly and take their interests into account when making decisions that affect them. And we are now in that position with more or less every non-human everywhere. And so these relational considerations cut both ways. And so for me, when we think about capabilities reasons for priority setting, relational reasons for priority setting, those often cut both ways and cancel each other out. Neither one vindicates any kind of universal presumption of human exceptionalism. So all that remains are the practical realities that I mentioned. Our knowledge is limited, our power is limited, our political will is limited. We need to work within our limitations. We need to pursue and implement policies that we can achieve and sustain. We need to take care of ourselves to be able to take care of others. I think all of that is true, and that is what sets the limit on how much we should prioritize non-humans. But what that means is we can and should prioritize them a lot more, because we can in fact achieve and sustain much more care for them than we are currently showing them. We have all kinds of co-beneficial policies we can pursue. Food system reform that would be better for humans and animals and the environment at the same time. Infrastructure reform, bird-safe glass, wildlife corridors that would be better for humans and animals and the environment at the same time. Slower, more careful AI development that can both ensure that AI is safer for humans and other animals and ensure that we have safeguards in place for if and when AI is advanced enough to deserve moral consideration too. All this low-hanging fruit is even better for us, not even a sacrifice. And then, if there are modest forms of sacrifice that would make things even better for non-humans, we can do that too. So if the practical limits are really what constrain our duties of care to non-humans, that means we gotta go a lot farther now. And then as we do improve human lives and societies, as we do increase our ability to care for others sustainably, that means our responsibilities are gonna increase accordingly. And what I would love to work towards is a future where we have improved our own lives and societies to such an extent that we can actually achieve and sustain a practice of allocating a majority of our resources to non-humans. Kind of like a person who grows up, becomes a partner at a law firm, making millions of dollars a year, and now has the luxury of being able to donate a majority of their income to care for others. I would love for us as a species to be able to do that. Get so in such a good place that we can give a majority of our resources to other species and reorient ourselves, re-understand ourselves, conceptualize ourselves as stewards of the planet for everyone else. And that, to me, would be like a wonderful victory for our species. So that is my kind of positive vision. It doesn't mean we should work towards a future in which we no longer matter the most, but that to me would be a victory, not any kind of failure or defeat. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
So you can invite people to put questions in the chat, or if you're in the room and you want to start us off.